Hey everybody, today we're going to be covering Chapter 12, which is covering scene size up. In this chapter, we're going to be going over why we take safety precautions and violence that we see towards EMS personnel. We'll also go over the necessary standard precautions and other PPE or personal protection equipment and the precautions that we want to take for that. We'll also cover determining how to determine the nature of a problem as well as the number of patients. So when we the field that we work in, it's a very uncontrolled environment, and things can go from 0 to 100 very quickly. So we want to make sure that we can identify when there are potential hazards on the scene, because if you do not, and you don't recognize these hazards, it could end up costing you your life or some form of injury, something along those lines. So you want to make sure that you do a very proper scene size up on every call you go to, no matter what it is that you go to. Always remember that a scene size up is a dynamic and ongoing process that continues throughout the call. Scene size up does not end after you contact the patient. In fact, in my opinion, scene size up begins from the time that you get that call. As you are pulling out of the station, you are looking for any hazards as you're getting on the roadway and heading to the scene. Once you arrive on scene, once you assess the patient, treat them, get them loaded up, start going. There are three goals that you want to do during your scene size up. You want to make sure that you identify any possible hazards at the scene and ensure your safety, which is always number one, your personal safety, the safety of other members of your EMS crew, the patient, and the bystanders. Identify what led to your being called to the scene, whether it be an injury or a medical problem. This identification can help determine the steps you need to follow to assess the patient and provide proper emergency care. You also want to determine whether there are any factors such as the number of patients or unusual characteristics of the scene that might require a call for additional assistance. With these goals in mind, proceed with the scene size up by evaluating the following components in a stepwise manner. Step 1. Take the necessary standard precautions to not only protect yourself against contact with blood and other bodily fluids, and put on any other necessary personal protective equipment or PPE. Equipment such as gloves, eye protection, surgical mask, a high efficiency particulate air mask, HEPA, or an N95 mask, a gown, helmet, or turnout gear as appropriate. Evaluate the scene for safety hazards, whether it's environmental, hazardous materials, roadway traffic. If the scene is not safe, do not enter it until it is made safe. Protect yourself, your crew, the patient, and bystanders. And if needed, retreat from the scene if it becomes unsafe. Determine the mechanism of injury or the nature of the illness. Is the patient injured, thus making them a trauma patient, an ill or medical patient, or are they injured and ill? Because remember, any trauma patient can be a medical, just like any medical patient can be a trauma patient. If you do have a trauma patient, you want to determine the mechanism of injury. If it's a medical patient, you want to determine the nature of illness. Is the MOI or NOI unknown at this time and unable to be determined until further assessment is done? Determine the number of patients at the scene so that way you know if you need to call for additional resources and begin a mass CAS situation. Determine the need for additional resources to effectively manage the scene or the patient, such as law enforcement, a hazmat team for chemical and biological threats, the fire department, specialized search and extrication teams due to structural collapse, or special rescue teams if needed for swift water rescue, or a surgical emergency rescue team, or even the power utility company. In a recent study published in Pre-Hospital Emergency Care, the authors found that 69% of the EMS personnel studied had experienced some form of violence over the preceding 12 months while providing EMS care. Verbal abuse was the most common, 67%, compared to physical violence, or 43.6%. The types of physical violence include punching, slapping or scratching, spitting, biting, being struck with an object, stabbing or attempted stabbing, and shooting or attempted shooting. Ladies and gentlemen, many people that we go to, they do have some type of psychiatric problem. And depending on the area that you go in, the trust for first responders, whether it's police, fire, or EMS, are very low. So you always be careful. Gloves must be considered standard protective equipment. Wear examination gloves for every patient you suspect has come into contact with blood, other body fluids, mucous membranes, a break in the continuity of the skin, or other potential exposure to transmissible diseases. The extent of standard precautions used in application of other personal protective equipment varies depending on the suspected pathogen, anticipated exposure to blood, or other body fluids. If the dispatch information alerts you to a patient with tuberculosis, or to a patient in an institutional setting such as a nursing home where such infections are common, you should wear gloves, eyewear, and an N95 or Chpt respirator. You should not use any PPE for which you have not been specially trained in its use. As an example, you should not use a self-contained breathing apparatus or SCBA to enter a confined space with a low oxygen environment unless you have been specifically trained in the use of the SCBA and have been approved to its use on scene. Some personal protective equipment that is needed in the hazardous zone may not be necessary outside of that area. For example, a firefighter will wear full protective equipment to enter the burning structure to rescue a patient. The firefighter still wearing full protective equipment may deliver that patient to you in a staged area well away from any danger from the structure fire. Because you are working in a safe and protected area, not in the immediate hazard zone, it is not necessary to wear the same full protective equipment as a firefighter. Prior to entering the crash vehicle to assess and manage a patient, you must consider what level of personal protection is needed to protect yourself against the same personal injury. Where firefighters or those responsible for extrication at the scene of a crashed vehicle with exposed jagged metal and glass are wearing personal protective equipment to protect against personal injury, which may include but not limited to turnout gear, a helmet, heavy gloves, an ANSI certified vest, and eye protection, your PPE should be at the same level of the other rescuers on scene, because if you are in the same immediate hazard zone and exposed to the same hazards. So as you can see in this example, whoops, I don't need my pen. There we go. So all the ones that are actively involved in the extrication, including the one even inside the vehicle, are all wearing the same equipment. Helmet, eye protection, turnout gear, as well as their ANSI vest or reflective vests. The EMT is standing in the back in the safety area so that prepared with equipment so that once the patient is extricated, they can quickly get in and extricate the patient safely. If they fail to control the scene will control the EMT. Someone must be in charge. That someone might become the patient, a family member, or a crowd of bystanders if the EMT fails to take charge. Sleeplessness, preoccupation with other problems, apathy, and overconfidence can lead an EMT to shortcut or ignore the principles of scene safety. Do not let this happen to you. The consequences can be costly for the patient, your partners, and even you. Receipt of the call notification from the dispatcher can help you anticipate what standard precautions and other personal protection equipment you will need at the scene. Be aware that callers at times may deliberately give inaccurate information. For example, a caller may report chest pains when the problem is a stabbing or a gunshot wound. If the caller had reported the facts, it's likely that law enforcement personnel would also have been dispatched, something the caller wished to avoid. Use the dispatch information to prepare for the scene, but remain alert to the possibility of different circumstances upon your arrival. Hazards can include a multitude of different things, whether it's an infectious disease, angry patients or bystanders, crime scenes, hazmats, or even a down power line. If you ever see a power line that appears to be down, do not automatically assume that that is not charged, even if there is arcing from it or not. Ensure that it's down by having the power company come through and shut power to that line. At any time during the scene size-up, it may be necessary to recognize your own limitations and call for additional resources or specially trained personnel for situations or rescues that are beyond your training. Whether it is a high-angle rescue, extrication from a vehicle or a building, or a water rescue that you don't have the equipment for. Don't be afraid to call for help. An injured or helpless EMT cannot provide emergency care to a patient. In addition, attention and resources may be diverted from the patient to the injured EMT, risking further compromise to the patient. You must study the scene carefully and determine whether it is safe to approach the patient. This determination must be made on all responses. Routine principles of scene safety include ensuring traffic is controlled, using caution when crowds have gathered, always having your portable radio with you when you leave the ambulance, and requesting the resources you need. Situations in which hazards can be anticipated include crash scenes, special rescue scenes, unstable surfaces and slopes, ice and water, toxic substance or low oxygen atmospheres, fires, crime scenes, and bar rooms. Managing patients at crash scenes or on roadways and highways places the EMT at extreme risk of being struck by moving traffic. Make sure that you take extra precautions at crime scenes, suspected crime scenes, and scenes involving volatile crowd situations. Wait for the arrival of police, or, if a scene turns threatening, retreat and wait for the police. These scenes often include domestic violence calls. Be sure to bring your portable radio with you when you leave the ambulance so that you can contact dispatch or medical direction from the scene for needed resources or advice. Call for help from the appropriate agencies. And if a scene is outside your area of training or expertise. And if a scene ever becomes hazardous, get out. At a crash scene, the EMT's attention is drawn naturally and immediately to the patients. That is who we're there for. This thus may put the EMT at considerable risk if the crash scene is not properly controlled and safety precautions have not been taken to protect emergency medical and other personnel, not only from hazards that exist because of the crash itself, but also from vehicle traffic around the crash scene. Consider all power lines to be energized until a power company representative tells you they are not. Power lines can be on the car, under the car, or touching a guardrail or wire fence that the car is in contact with. And if the lines are lying on wet ground and energizing a large area, you might want to go back further. If you ever pull up on a scene where the power lines are down, do not get out of your vehicle until you are told that they are not energized. So when you're pulling up to this scene, you see the car sitting here, so you want to hurry up and get there as soon as you can. You're just looking at the immediate ground area. You don't see any power lines down. Well, if you do not do a proper scene size up, you may miss this pole leaning up on the power lines. At any time, these lines could potentially snap and that pole fall down on top of you while you're working on the vehicle, or the lines fall down nearby and you get electrocuted. Scenes that involve highly visible incidents, such as tanker spills, pipeline ruptures, and heavy smoke conditions, should automatically alert you to call on specialized assistance to control the situation. Crime scenes require special measures to ensure the personal protection of the EMT. Get PD on scene. let them clear it, and then once they clear it, they will let you know, and you can then come in. Some rescue scenes require specialized training and equipment. You must be prepared to call on additional specialized resources, such as in this case a heavy rescue team, to ensure not only the EMT's own well-being, but also the successful rescue of the patient. Some characteristics that you want to consider on scene. Is there any jagged metal or broken glass posing a threat? Can this material be avoided, covered, or otherwise isolated to minimize the threat? If so, cover it. If not, have the proper PPE. Are there any undeployed airbags? If so, we need to secure these airbags so that way we don't risk it going off while we are working on the patient. Is fuel leaking? And if so, is an ignition source nearby? Is there a fire? Has the fire department been called? If rescue is possible, do not approach a burning vehicle directly from the front or the rear. This is because the possible explosion hazards are the greatest, so approach the vehicle from the side. Are there any hazardous materials involved? If so, you need to remove yourself, call for a hazmat team, and create a safety zone, which we will cover in later chapters. Another serious threat to emergency medical and other rescue personnel at a crash scene is moving traffic. There are many well-documented incidents of EMTs being killed or severely injured by vehicles crashing into emergency personnel and emergency vehicles at a crash scene on a highway or roadway. A lot of times when people are driving past an accident, they like to look and see what's going on. This takes their eyes away from the flow of traffic, and they could potentially run into you. If needed, shut down traffic on the roadway with the utilization of police or fire apparatuses. And limit your time on scene to reduce exposure to traffic. Always keep your eyes on the flow of traffic. Never have your back to it. To try to reduce this incident you want to try to take as many precautions as necessary. Whether it's placing flares or cones to alter the flow of traffic. Placing vehicles strategically so that way they protect the scenes. That way if a vehicle does start coming at you, if you have that fire apparatus, let me grab a pen. There we go. Alright. So let's say you have a vehicle wrecked here. Okay. And we are on a 4-lane highway. Alright. I'll just draw mine. So there's the wreck. With the fire apparatus, obviously not this close to the wreck, but they would position their apparatus in a way to where now the scene is protected. And then the ambulance will come up here, park on that side. That way everybody is now protected. Don't jump highway dividers to provide emergency care while leaving yourself exposed to moving traffic. Reduce any unnecessary scene lighting that may distract or impair visibility of oncoming traffic. So when you arrive on scene, we have 2 sets of lightings for our emergency lights. We have a primary and secondary. With the primary light, that's when you have the white and red strobes. So flip to your secondary, to where now it's only the red strobes flashing. They are able to be still seen by traffic in all directions, but they don't ruin people's sight as much. When turning on your floodlights, only turn on the lights that are facing the scene, so that way it does not impair any traffic that is coming through. You must always remain alert and take as many precautions as necessary to reduce your risk of being struck by moving traffic. Wear an ANSI certified reflective safety vest at the crash scene to make yourself highly visible both during the day and at night. You'll also learn once you get into the field, you will take an emergency vehicle operators course where they will teach you how to properly position your vehicle on scene of a wreck. Such as turning the wheels of parked emergency vehicles so they are pointed away from the scene. So that way once you always know that once you load up the patient, you have a way to get out. The EMT must also be prepared to call on additional specialized resources to ensure not only their own well-being, but the successful rescue of the patient. Whether it is a chemical, biological, nuclear weapon of mass destruction, severe heights such as on rooftops, trees, or construction areas, natural disasters, and underground areas such as caves, manholes, and trenches would require specialized rescue teams. The presence of ice can complicate any scene, making what would normally be a simple rescue hazardous. Avoid walking onto frozen ponds, lakes, or other bodies of water if the safety and thickness of the ice is unknown. In these cases, notify rescue teams who are trained and equipped for ice rescue. Drownings are common reasons for the dispatch of an EMT team, but water can also be a factor in other types of calls. Always proceed with caution in situations where water is a factor. Rescue in moving water, such as rivers, streams, or creeks, presents the problems of open water rescue, but further complicates it because of the force of the current. Often, a current makes swimming difficult or impossible. Patients and rescuers alike can easily be swept away, even in shallow water. If the current is strong enough, never wade or walk into moving water in an attempt to rescue without adequate training and equipment. It is the EMT's duty to ensure that adequate numbers of appropriately trained and equipped personnel are summoned if necessary to handle special rescues. Some special situations that EMTs might frequently encounter include those described next. Victims of injury or illness may be encountered on unstable surfaces or slopes. Such surfaces create additional difficulties and hazards and can greatly complicate treatment and transport of the patient. Access to patients in such circumstances may require the use of ropes. If you're not trained in the proper use of ropes in such situations, summon or wait for a trained rescue crew. If you have been properly trained, remember to secure the patient to the hillside to prevent him from sliding down slope during assessment, treatment, and stabilization. Be sure that vehicles that have gone over embankments have been secured to prevent them from sliding, carrying occupants and EMS personnel away. Also, beware of loose rocks and stones that may be knocked down to your position by rescuers working above. Drownings are common reasons for the dispatch of an EMT, but water can also be a factor in other types of calls. Always proceed with caution in situations where water is a factor. If you are faced with a situation beyond your capacity to handle, summon and wait for backup from those with proper training and equipment. Swimming pools present a major challenge for rescue of a patient. The patient will be visible, but to the EMT who's untrained in water rescue, retrieving the patient will be difficult and should never be attempted alone. The EMT's partner should be close at hand to lend assistance, preferably from the pool's edge. A personal flotation device and a line or pole to assist the rescuer and patient to the pool's edge should be used. Rescue in open water is a specialized technique that requires training and equipment. The EMT must ensure that adequate resources are summoned when people have been reported as drowned or missing. The EMT going out into the water must wear a personal flotation device. Rescue in moving water presents the problems of open water, further complicated by the force of the current. Patients and rescuers alike can easily be swept away, even in shallow water, if the current is strong enough. Never wade or walk into moving water in an attempt to rescue without adequate training and equipment. Whitewater or moving water rescues include specialized techniques and equipment and extensive training that you will not receive in this class. The EMT must be alert to the possible presence of toxic substances or areas of low oxygen during the scene size-up. Some scenes, such as a crash involving a tanker truck, will present obvious hazards. At other scenes, the hazard may not be as obvious. For example, a call to aid someone who fell in their kitchen might present a toxic hazard if, during the fall, the person knocked over and spilled bleach and ammonia. The combination of the two creates chloramine gas, a very potent lung irritant. Other highly toxic scenes that pose great risk for EMTs are those involving chemical suicides. People who intend to or commit suicide using this method often mix dangerous chemicals or release a gas such as propane in an enclosed space to asphyxiate themselves. Suspect the presence of toxic substances or an oxygen-depleted atmosphere in the following circumstances. Scenes that involve highly visible incidents such as tanker spills, pipeline ruptures, and heavy smoke conditions should automatically alert you to call on specialized assistance to control the situation. Caves, wells, tankers, manholes, and underground utility vaults, silos, closed garages, and other confined spaces are areas where the EMT must exercise extreme caution. Such areas may be low in oxygen and or high in toxic substances. And or high in toxic substances such as methane. Entry into a confined space should be made with appropriate SCBA in place. Many well-meaning rescuers have failed to recognize the risk of confined space entry and have themselves become victims along with the patients they plan to rescue. A toxic environment generally causes people within it to suffer from similar symptoms. When called to a residence in which all occupants exhibit similar signs and symptoms, assume that the environment is toxic until it is proven not to be. Faulty furnaces cause such problems in winter, but a blocked flue on a gas hot water tank can produce the same problem in a closed, air-conditioned residence at the peak of summer. Heat sources and cooking devices in bottles or containers, tubing, and other drug-making paraphernalia are also commonly found in clandestine labs. You must be alert to the possibility of encountering such situations on every call. If you're not trained to make the environment safe in such situations, you must consider specialized rescue or fire units who can. There will be times when you are sent to scenes at which no crime has been reported, but where you suspect that a crime might be involved. A report of an injury at a bar late at night or a call to an area with a high crime rate might be suspect. Be alert to the possibility of danger on such calls. A dispatcher may not know that the scene to which they are directing you is, in fact, a crime scene. While you're en route to such a scene, check to see whether police have also been called. If they have not, request their support if needed. By arriving discreetly, you draw less attention to the scene and minimize the chances of drawing a crowd. Perform the scene size up. If the scene appears hostile or threatening, do not stop, drive on, and await police backup. It's prudent to park 2 or 3 houses away from the scene, affording you more opportunity to study the area before becoming involved. At crime scenes in which guns might be involved, parking in such a position will usually put you outside the killing zone, or the area controlled by hostile fire. If someone inside the house has a gun, an area about 120 degrees in front of the house is at least partially exposed to fire. The area can be much larger depending on the location of the house. The killing zone is not static and is always subject to change. Is the scene chaotic? If so, do not allow yourself to be pulled into the chaos. Is the scene hysterical? Again, don't get pulled in. Does the crowd seem hostile to your presence? If it does, your options include retreating until appropriate backup arrives, or taking the patient and leaving. Be alert to the possibility that the scene could suddenly turn dangerous. Be prepared to retreat if it does. When approaching the scene, follow these procedures. Walk on the grass, not the sidewalk, for a quieter, less obvious approach. If using a flashlight, hold it beside you, not in front of your body, because if there is a shooter, they're going to shoot at the light. If you're walking with a partner, walk single file. The last person in line should carry the jump kit. This will leave the person or persons at the front of the line unencumbered and better able to react to any problems they may be encountered. Only the first person in line should carry a flashlight, because anyone with a flashlight behind the first will backlight those in front. As you approach the scene, note possible places of concealment and cover. Keep illuminating or scanning dark or shadowed areas for movement as you approach a house. Take a moment to look at windows and corners. If you need to take a longer look, change positions to make it harder for a hostile person to get a fix on you. When you come to the door, stand to the side of a door when you knock on it to avoid being a target for someone shooting, springing out, or reaching to grab at you through the door. Standing to the knob side prevents the door that opens outward from blocking you. If the door opens inward, the person opening it will most likely be looking towards the hinge side, letting you see them before they see you. As soon as the door is open, assess the situation before you decide whether to retreat and call for reinforcement, or to have your partner move the ambulance up to the front of the building. As you enter, leave doors open behind you to ensure an escape route. Likewise, never appear to block the patient's route of escape. When you're at the patient's side, your first priority remains protecting yourself and your partner. The next priority is to protect and treat the patient. If you reach a patient and discover that a perpetrator may still be on the scene and police intervention will be necessary, ensure that the police have been called and follow local protocols, and be ready to retreat. When you are on scene of a secured crime scene, try to limit the number of responders to the number required to care for the patient. Do not allow bystanders to touch or disturb the patient or their immediate surroundings. Introduce yourself to the patient and say that you're there to help them. Crime victims are often confused and fearful of contact with strangers. Be alert to the possibility that the patient at the crime scene may not always be simply a victim, but also a perpetrator. Keep track of the patient's hands in a hostile situation. Be prepared for the possibility that such a patient may suddenly reach for a weapon. If possible, have one EMT keep a constant watch on bystanders and the surrounding area while you work on the patient to alert you if a scene begins to turn dangerous. Remember, as you work on the patient, that your task is to render medical assistance and to save their life, not to aid in solving a crime. Be as considerate of police requests as possible, but keep your primary task in mind. Where appropriate, assist police in collecting and recording anything on the patient, such as blood, hair, seminal fluid, gunpowder residue, or clothing fibers, and follow local protocol when handling these fibers. Take extreme care not to disturb any evidence that's not directly on the patient's body, whether it's footprints, broken glass, tire tracks, and so on. If there's never touch or move suspected weapons unless it is necessary for treating the patient's injuries. Many guns found are loaded and extremely dangerous to handle because of the possibility of accidental discharge. Such a gun in the hands of an untrained person could pose an extreme hazard to you, your partner, the patient, and bystanders. If you do touch a weapon, do not disturb any fingerprints that may be on it. Pick up a gun by the edge of the grip and use gauze pads to pick up a knife at the very edge of the blade. Wear gloves the entire time on scene of a crime scene to avoid leaving your fingerprints on scene also. If you do need to tear or cut away clothing to expose a wound, make sure that you do not cut through a bullet hole or knife slash in the clothing. Keep the clothing and submit it as evidence to the police. If possible, have one EMT keep a constant watch on the bystanders and the surrounding area while you work on the patient to alert you if a scene begins to become dangerous. If the patient was strangled or tied with a rope and other material, cut at a point away from the knot instead of untying it. The knot can be used as evidence and may help identify the perpetrator. If the patient is responsive, do not burden them with questions about the crime. Treat their injuries and transport them. This is because they're going to possibly be showing extremes of emotion, so you need to be sure to handle those emotions, but you don't want to worsen them. If the patient is obviously dead when you arrive, do nothing and disturb nothing. Summon the police if they have not already been called, and wait for their arrival. However, remember that you must provide basic life support and other appropriate care as you would for any patient, unless injuries are so extreme or the patient has obviously been dead for so long that resuscitation is out of the question. Follow local protocol, standard operating policies, and procedures. If using a flashlight, make sure you hold it beside you, because if someone is shooting, they're going to shoot at the light. If you are walking with a partner, walk single file. Last person in line should be the one carrying the jump kit. Do not stand directly in front of a door, so that way if someone starts shooting, you do not get hit. Scenes in which the bystanders or patient are prone to sudden changes in behavior put the emergency medical personnel at risk for violence and personal injury. The problems are compounded in a bar room, where patrons often know each other and their actions may be affected by long-standing friendships or feuds about which you have no knowledge. If you receive a call to one during daylight hours, your eyes can require several minutes to adjust from bright sunlight to low light vision. By wearing sunglasses while outside, you can shorten the time of adjustment considerably. It is critical that you do not antagonize the patrons. A routine question or comment can easily be misunderstood by an inebriated patient or bystander and lead to a violent confrontation. Have your partner stand and survey the patrons at all times. Do not turn your back on the people in the bar. Also, do not reply to any verbal threats, but never ignore them either. It takes only an instant for verbal abuse to turn into a physical assault. If the situation becomes threatening, retreat temporarily and call for police support. The EMT's uniform or the emergency lights on the ambulance may be misinterpreted as the police by vehicle occupants who may be intoxicated on alcohol and or drugs. Thus, you should park your ambulance at least one car length behind the vehicle. Park with your wheels turned slightly to the left so that if you must back up, you won't go any deeper into the shoulder of the road. Align your headlights in the middle of the trunk of the vehicle and turn them to high beam. Try to reflect your beams off the rearview mirror, illuminating the car's interior and making your approach more difficult for the occupants of the vehicle to see. While still in the ambulance, write down the license number of the vehicle and leave it at the radio. Note how many people are in the vehicle and also where they are in the vehicle. Be wary around tinted windows. As you approach, be alert to the possibility of other unseen occupants. Check to see whether the trunk is locked, and look on the rear seat and the floor as you pass. Have your partner open the passenger door a split second before you open the driver's door if you are alone. Wait for the help to arrive. Keep behind the center post. Carry an object such as a report book or bag that you can throw at the occupant's face if they do become violent. If you must retreat, immediately get into your vehicle and back up rapidly. Move 100 to 150 yards to clear the killing zone. Emergencies can also expose a patient to the curiosity of the public, a situation some may find highly stressful. The EMT must have a keen awareness of how such factors affect the patient and be prepared to do what's necessary to change them to ensure the patient's safety and comfort. If you are unable to control the scene to make it safe for the patient, move the patient quickly to a safe environment, such as in the back of the ambulance. Your attention as an EMT must be directed toward the patient. However, the crowd is part of the scene, and making sure the bystanders are safe is one of your responsibilities during scene size-up. If hazards to the bystanders cannot be minimized or eliminated, remove those bystanders from the scene. In cases of spills, leaks, fires, or heavy smoke, bystanders must be kept back using roadblocks, detours, police lines, and public address systems advising bystanders of the risk. In such situations, bystanders who do not disperse should be dealt with by the police. When controlling the scene, there's multiple different ways that we can do that, such as providing light. Make it a point to have a good flashlight and keep it handy whether during the day or night. If you need to, move furniture that interferes with access to the patient. This should be done after advising the patient or bystanders of your intentions. In a residence, you must remember that despite the emergency, you are a guest in that home and should demonstrate a proper level of respect toward the owner or occupants. You may need to move the patient to an area more conducive to patient care. Attempting to resuscitate a patient in a cramped bathroom would generally make little sense when, by moving the patient 5 feet to the bedroom, you would have plenty of space in which to work. Whenever an injury is suspected, the patient must be properly immobilized to a backboard before any movement is attempted. If outdoors, try to position the ambulance in such a way that the crowd won't get between you, the patient, and the ambulance. When working indoors, consider asking bystanders to keep all doors along the route to the ambulance open. Don't allow yourself to be cornered. If the mood of a crowd turns ugly, you, your partners, and your patient may be in danger. Remember that a concerned crowd poses far less of a threat than an unruly crowd. Stay in control and anticipate things that will happen before they occur. Initiate action rather than respond to the actions of others at the scene. Stay calm. Other team members, the patient, and the bystander will respond more positively if you stay calm. Use tact and diplomacy. A compassionate, understanding tone may produce more positive results than a harsh, demanding one. And always have a plan A if to deal with the situations you are facing, but remain ready to shift to plans B, C, D, E, F if conditions indicate that plan A don't work. Because always remember, a good plan never works. Pre-hospital care involves working with people of a variety of ages, races, religions, and backgrounds. Many people have ways of life that is quite different from yours, and some of them are ways that you would not choose to follow. Not only do you need to be alert to yourself, but you also need to be alert to your partners and your surroundings. Be compassionate toward the people you have been called to serve. Treat all people the way you would wish to have your loved ones treated in their time of need, because someday you may be in that need also. Scene size-up is a very dynamic process. EMS personnel must continuously assess the emergency scene for unusual characteristics such as sound, smells, or things that look odd. The key to remaining safe is to always remain vigilant. When at scene, always maintain situational awareness. If you need to shift your attention to patient assessment and management once you have entered the scene and deemed it safe. However, you still need to be aware of all aspects of the scene around you. Y'all bear with me, we're almost done. After scene safety has been ensured, the next step in the scene size-up is determining the nature of the patient's problem that brought you to the scene. The two basic categories of problems are trauma and medical. Which category a patient falls into will determine how you proceed with your continuing assessment and treatment of the patient. In pre-hospital care, the EMT first looks for evidence of an injury. If the possibility of injury is ruled out, the EMT may assume that the patient has a medical condition. As always, you should remain open-minded and flexible as you try to determine the nature of the problem. Sometimes a patient won't fit neatly into one category or the other. For example, you may encounter a diabetic suffering from an altered mental status from taking too much insulin who has fallen down a flight of stairs. This patient is suffering from both a trauma and medical condition. The index of suspicion is the degree of your anticipation that the patient has been injured, or has been injured in a specific way, based on your knowledge that certain mechanisms usually produce certain types of injuries. The mechanism of injury provides only a degree of suspicion of the types of injuries. It does not, however, provide any indication of the actual emergencies or condition. Only physical examination can be used to determine the actual patient injuries. Identification of the mechanism of injury in a trauma patient may begin with the dispatch information. Dispatch to an automobile crash, shooting, fall, or stabbing will provide some preliminary information as to the mechanism of injury. Scene characteristics provide clues about what forces were applied to the body and the possible patterns of injury that may have resulted from them. Identification of the mechanism of injury in a trauma patient may begin with the dispatch information. Whether I'm not paying attention. Whether it's contact or rec sports, such as football, soccer, RV crashes, falls greater of 12 feet in an adult, or 5 feet in a child, or 2 to 3 times their height, would be an indication of a serious injury in a child. Once you arrive at the scene, however, it is necessary to take a much closer look at such scene characteristics as damage to the automobile, use of restraints, distance the patient fell, type of surface the patient fell on, the position in which they landed, object the patient struck, or the caliber of gun the patient was shot with. Such characteristics provide clues about what forces were applied to the body, and the possible patterns of injury that may have resulted from them. Look for evidence of a fall when arriving on scene. Fallen ladders, collapsed scaffolding, ropes in a tree or on buildings, trees in the immediate proximity of the patient, stairs, roofs, balconies are all common places to fall from or indicators that a fall may have occurred. Blunt forces applied to the body produce widespread injuries to organs, bones, muscles, nerves, and blood vessels. The type of collision or point of impact to the vehicle commonly dictates the types of injuries to expect. Study the vehicle carefully, if possible, to identify this information. When approaching the scene of an MVC, look for evidence of both external impact to the vehicle from an outside force and internal impact to the vehicle caused by a patient's body. One EMT should quickly walk around all sides of the vehicle to identify points of impact. Also to look for any significant impacts that would be on the other side, such as displacement of a vehicle axle, deformity of the vehicle, or intrusion into the passenger compartment. They should also walk around the vehicle, should conduct a close inspection of the passenger compartment for signs of impact that correlate with specific types of injuries, such as a missing rearview mirror, impact marks or starring of the windshield, collapsed steering wheel, or a broken seat. Deployment of driver and front seat airbags may produce an impact mark that resembles what would be made by the patient's head contacting the windshield. In this case, determine whether the safety belt restraint system was used and examine the head for evidence of trauma. Ejection from the vehicle usually produces significant blunt or penetrating trauma. Patients often die, not from the ejection itself, but from the car rolling on top of them. The death or significant injury of one passenger should cause you to suspect significant injury to other passengers. Try to determine and document the type of impact involved in the crash of a motorcycle. The following types of impacts are common. Whether it's head-on, where the rider is propelled forward off the bike, or an angular, where the rider strikes an object. Ejection is where the rider is thrown from the motorcycle and impacts the ground. Or when the rider lays the bike down, where they purposefully lay the bike down on its side to avoid another potential serious impact. It's also to determine whether or not the patient was wearing a helmet and the type of helmet they had on. Snowmobiles, also known as snow machines, and ATVs are commonly operated on uneven terrain, a factor that contributes to rollovers. Crush-type injuries are common with recreational vehicles. Snowmobiles can travel at high speed, producing severe impact upon collision with trees, rocks, or other vehicles. With these vehicles, be especially alert for clothesline-type injuries. In these injuries, a rider is pulled off the vehicle by a low branch, wire, rope, or other low-hanging object. Severe trauma to the neck and airway is common with this type of crash. Whenever you receive reports of a shooting or stabbing at the scene of a call, it is necessary to expose and assess the patient's body to confirm or rule out a stabbing or a gunshot wound. With an unresponsive patient, completely expose them and look for a penetrating injury, whether or not blood is visible at the scene or around the body. Also, be sure to log roll the patient to inspect the posterior for open wounds. Heavy coats, dark clothing, poor lighting in dark environments, or dark hair hide blood very well. Whenever you receive reports of a shooting, always expose the body to look for those injuries. Next. Explosions are another source of trauma, whether it's by gas, fireworks, gasoline, propane, grain dust and grain elevators, and criminal intent are common causes of explosion. Look for injuries caused by the pressure wave associated with the blast, by flying debris, and by the collision that results when a patient propelled by the blast contacts the ground or other objects. In a patient who is not injured but is suffering from a medical condition, you will begin to determine the nature of the illness during scene size-up. After you arrive at the scene, you must determine the reason that you were called. Simply asking the patient or family members an open-ended question like, "What seems to be the problem today?" could provide you with the exact nature of the illness. The patient or their family may try to mislead you or to cloud the real nature of the illness. For example, to hide the use of drugs such as heroin or cocaine, which are illegal. Inspect the scene for clues about the illness. Look for prescription and non-prescription medications, drug paraphernalia, alcohol, drugs, and other pertinent clues. Home oxygen equipment may indicate a pre-existing respiratory or cardiac condition. The physical position and condition of the patient may provide information about the illness as well. For instance, a tripod position where they are sitting up and leaning forward may indicate respiratory distress or cardiac compromise. Environmental conditions may provide clues to the nature of the illness as well. Extreme cold, wet and cold clothing, or a patient found outdoors in cool weather should suggest the possibility of hypothermia. A hot and humid environment, especially if the patient was playing a sport or performing some other strenuous activity, should suggest a possible heat emergency. The last major element of the scene size-up is determining the total number of patients. Sometimes this is simple, as in the case of a single responsive patient who has called for help because of chest pain. At other times, as in the case of a multiple vehicle collision during a nighttime snowstorm or a suspected carbon monoxide poisoning in a multifamily dwelling, it is more complicated. If after studying the scene you determine that there are more patients than your unit can effectively handle, initiate your local multiple casualty plan. If the number of patients surpasses your resources, begin triage and prioritization of the victims. Follow local protocols. Alright guys, that completes for this chapter. If y'all have any questions, please be sure to send them to me in Blackboard or in Remind, or write them down and we will talk about it next time we are in class. And remember, scene size-up is a pertinent step of your assessment. Alright, it is a very fluid and dynamic process that happens from the time you get that call to the time you get back to the station. Alright, y'all don't have anything? I will see y'all next time.